makes a lot of sense. So for us, the walkability supports urban density. That's very important for me. And efficient mobility. For me, walking is primarily a means of moving around and getting to where you want to go, but also within that you can have more communication in the public realm and urban places. And that implies quality of life, and health and fitness in the end comes as a side effect. I think it is so important that we're living in an age of urban concentration. I think last year my lecture was all about that. The post-forest network society, we will all need to interact in R&D, marketing, finance, to reprogram continuously the production systems which lie outside the city, and we can become concentrating in the city, competing globally through various forms of innovation. So this walkable London, I think, would give the global market for desirable locations of high value jobs in creative business a competitive edge. So, and that's where we also, that's the kind of world we are also inhabiting. So the proposition I want to offer is a full network of pedestrian lines across all of London, rather than a scatter of isolated pedestrian precincts, or also what I'm very familiar with from Germany, that you have a small historical core pedestrianized, which is usually becomes a kind of beautiful shopping mall of sorts with some businesses, and the rest is kind of car-based still. That works for small cities, but I think in London, a large city, I wanted to treat walkability similar to the cycle network and offer a pedestrian network. That would be my proposition, but I will come to this. So first of all, in terms of those isolated spots, which I think should be networked in the end, obviously they are, and they're very important to have a vibrant urbanity. You can't imagine us without pedestrian zones. We have them all over the place, and some of the hard-won improvements of carving away space for pedestrians have been very, very successful for public realm improvements. But also I want to mention the commercial benefits of this become evident. And if you look at private developments around London, starting around the corner here with Westfield, is that they're heavily investing in pedestrian zones. So you have a lot of private squares and privately managed and owned public spaces which seem to go for the pedestrian. And I think it is a great indication. Same as King's Cross with King's Boulevard, Granary Square, and very large public realms, privately owned and run, shows that this means something, that this is viable, economically viable, and that for me always implies socially viable as well. You can see as well Paddington, so these are large pedestrianized segments. Of course they're fragments, they're isolated. Oh, am I going backward? Okay. The other thing which I want to point is temporary pedestrianizations, like in Regent Street, have been incredibly successful and driven up footfall and, of course, commercial value. And I was talking to Mr. Cookson, the head of Crown Estate, who have basically all properties on Regent Street. He is very much in favor of making such a proposition permanent. So I think there's a lot of indications that pedestrianization could vitalize. Of course, we need to discuss and see how this has to tie in with public transport strategies to take the cars out and substitute. And so we started to do some visualizations to bring this home, what this might mean and could mean as permanent pedestrian zones, some of those streets. I think we don't need to go all the way with all city roads, and an exhibition road is an interesting example, that you can have shared spaces, that you have prioritized pedestrians but not exclusive pedestrianization in some spaces, that you work like here in Kensington on just increasing sidewalk space and making crossings easier, etc. So these are gradual nudging on propositions which are very important to take over. What happened also at Oxford Street is the way these crossings are handled, and it's more convenient, you can cross diagonally. The way surfaces and architectural codings, semiology of defining public realm is very important, and this design becomes very important for us as designers. But still, in the end, Oxford Street is obviously highly problematic, and we're also talking about pollution, the fumes are incredibly dangerous, as we recently discovered, and becomes a big topic which will drive pedestrianization, I think. So we visualized totally emptying out of Oxford Street. Of course, it's one of the main policies of the mayor, and it's been already watered down, and we're going to see what is the final outcome of Oxford Street. I think it does require full pedestrianization and all the buses out to make that viable, and we try to visualize that for you guys. So I've been looking at some of these fragments and partial improvements kind of scattered around London, and we looked at what are the longer streets, how can you really cross town maybe with the pedestrian network. So we looked at what is the longest pedestrian street around the world. They're not that long actually, but here a few of them in Istanbul and Bulgaria, China, etc. I was a student in Stuttgart, I know this one. But we have something much larger and much longer. We have these kind of 13.7 kilometers, a 10-fold track across whole of London from west to east, which is the canal, Regent's Canal. And that's a lovely pedestrian route, which actually has a lot of activation in places alongside. But it's also just a means of transport, and incredibly fast and rapid and surprisingly one. So if you move along there, you feel telecommunicated across town, that you can actually work from Camden to Paddington comes as a huge surprise. I lived right at that canal, also across the other way, all the way through Shoreditch, because you can undercut all those crossings and don't have to fight traffic all the time. It becomes a real proposition, and a lot of people I know are starting to walk to work, because traffic is becoming so excessively slow that it's faster for you to cross the center of town. And to make that more viable, that's what we're proposing. And again, we have the other one is the whole river walk on the south bank, but now they're building up the north as well. And by the way, these are all private properties which are chained together, and it is actually the Corporation of London who is orchestrating that North River Walk as something which private developers are very happy to participate in as well. The other thing which I thought was revelatory was the High Line. And again, it's primarily means of transport, also a nice stroll. But if you walk 10 blocks, either down where you stop at each block, or on the High Line, it makes a huge difference for moving around. And it ties in not totally into the big development like Hudson Yard, and our building is right plugged onto this in New York. So this is the High Line right there. And it's a great experience and a great accelerator. You have similar projects in France, using old railway lines to cross. We've seen that in Vienna with bicycle paths. We're actually having a building hovering above such a bicycle path in Vienna. So to covering these old routes is also potentially a strategy to run pedestrian pathways along railway lines, next to railway lines, on top of railway lines. You have these elevated lines in the south, and you have these kind of trenches in the north, and they become also green corridors. Okay, temporary pedestrianization again, I think that will be the route, politically, if you think through it. If you temporarily block and take over, and let the audience get used to it, but also let car traffic get used to it, and see that they can actually survive and get around still, and is very important. So you have these major closures temporary closures in Paris and in New York, the so-called Summer Street, incredibly successful and also very lengthy and long. And you don't have to necessarily move all the way, you can plug in from all sides, and it becomes an armature of activation. This becomes the example, and we did some visualization of Fifth Avenue, or you could imagine every second avenue to be pedestrianized, why not? And so the proposition is starting to sit down and sketch which lines one could take, how one would develop that network and locate a certain patches within that. If we zoom in, so this is given and wonderful and a great armature. I would throw the bicycles out, by the way, to give that the pleasure and capacity it should have. So my criticism of the transport strategy so far with respect to London and the Mayor is cycling has been promoted and properly planned out, and pedestrian is just the beginning, and that's why in the consultation process I've put forward these sketches also to the Mayor. So I think this is a very important line. We have this one, and it's great success as well, and very, very long, crossing all the way east and west. The next one coming in is Oxford Street, and there are plans for its extension. New Oxford Street, Theobald's Road, Clerkenwell Road, I know this very well, all the way to Shoreditch and further. The next segment after Oxford Street is called the London Boulevard, and there are ideas of moving, there are promoters who want to turn this into a pedestrian priority boulevard. Now I'm saying go all the way and make it a full-on pedestrian access. And then we need to start to find some north-south, of course, axes and cross it, and we can discuss that. Picking up, obviously, a lot of underground station, trying to pick up some of the railway lines you come in, so you don't have to switch anymore. Just come in with the rail as a commuter from King's Cross, and then you walk the rest. I think that will be viable, and we come to this at the end. So we're trying to identify these lines, and maybe further east-west. So we're building up a network. And these lines need to work with, and I will detail this out later, with the high streets, of course. You can't, otherwise you have lots of cul-de-sacs. The high streets also is where all the shops, retail, restaurants have accumulated, where the underground stations are plugged in. So we need to pick out some of the high streets and pedestrianize them. That's the proposition. And also they keep running. They go all the way out, and you can extend that. And of course there are enough of those that there's enough left for traffic, and we pick those which are less big and more human scale and develop that. I think that's a viable proposition. And then you have secondary connections which don't run all the way through, but create a kind of grid network which allows you to go reach everywhere in the center of London on these paths. And then I'm saying within that you start to emerge already patches which could be more or less fully pedestrianized. Doesn't mean that sometimes cars can't go through. Of course, there's emergency vehicles and delivery at odd hours. That's the way we can learn the lessons from all the German pedestrian cities or other English cities, the way deliveries and so on managed in totally pedestrian centers. But we have in London, it's big, it has several of these historic centers. There's the West End, there's of course the city, which we should fully pedestrianize. I mean, I was talking to Ian Simpson, who is leading the efforts for the London Corporation. He is kind of pedestrianized in his mind Bank, a major political effort. But he just managed to keep, for a certain period of time, cars traffic out, but the buses are still pouring through. And there's enough of those to don't destroy any feeling of a pedestrian zone. Yes, you see more people crossing, but also because the cars come back before 7 and after, I think 8, the whole infrastructure of lights and traffic signs and curbs and tarmacs kills the whole sensibility which we would need. But I think it was still a great effort and a great signal that the city could be one of those historic centers which become fully pedestrianized. And then maybe we grow more of those and we build it up as we shift and concentrate more residences in the city, and we can more and more rely on the densified underground network, etc., cycling and walking. And why not walk a lot of that when you come in to the edges of this? I mean, people are healthy and fit late in life, and it's actually they should stay healthy and fit. They must be walking. They're not going to do that if they need to be nudged on, as it was a bit of a nudging theory here. So we looked at, of course, those patches and where is trade located. Of course, this connects up. There's also a value proposition. There's the idea of underground station and the accessibility of all those spots in these fully pedestrianized. You just walk a little bit, and we use, as a benchmark, we can use airports. We just designed a Beijing airport with a large terminal without trains, fully walkable, and the rule of thumb there is 650 meter you can find acceptable. And I think that with that rule you can fully cover actually London with central London with underground stations at the moment. The big challenge is bus routes. which deliver a lot. In central London, as you know, don't ever step into a bus because you're going to be locked in traffic and then you're kind of prisoner of the bus driver. I've experienced this too many times, so I will leave the bus before I enter central London. So there's problems there, of course, as well as with the horrendous diesel fumes, etc. But we need to obviously compete and fight away from some bus routes and turn them into pedestrian. And then the bus will have still the majority of other routes to go by. Traffic accidents, air quality is a big thing. I mean, I'm walking along London all the time and instinctively use secondary layers to move around, but then you actually have to walk more. You're kind of winding around and you have to know London. So there's a real problem if you don't pedestrianize some of those lines. And yes, you can walk along these highly traffic roads, but it's incredibly unhealthy and unpleasant. And also sidewalks start to become jammed up and you slow it down there, as well as standing at traffic lights all the time. So this is a big topic. Air quality, I mean, it's a scandal. And I know people who are suing governments around Europe, in particular also the London government, that they're not meeting any standards they signed up to in European treaties. And that's a very important point. Okay, let's just look at this one more time, and I will go into a bit of a detail on some of those lines. So the main thing is we have these two lines already existing, and these were the two new propositions we would have to fight for, this kind of new crossing. Two axes would do a lot to get going, and maybe it starts with a temporary condition on weekends, in the summer, to get used to test what the problems are. And I've presented this to an organization called Living Streets, and they looked at this for a long time, for many decades. And they looked at cases where there was temporary road closures due to road works, etc., and what the experiences are, and where is traffic going, and they found out traffic is disappearing. So there isn't the clogging up necessarily around this, and maybe people make other decisions. And so it becomes kind of self-regulating. So any model one can try to model, and we are starting to model this. It's, in the end, it's very unpredictable how people cope with this, but they do cope. In the end, life goes on maybe in a better way. So this is the line I want to. So the Oxford Street line has already been looked at and proposed. It comes to London Boulevard, just extended further. This is the line I've kind of picked out as my first trajectory, just to show you how one makes this decision. So you pick one, and you have others still going, and then you pick up things like pedestrian routes, like this is picking up on the Millennium Bridge, in fact. Picking up destinations which have a lot of destinations which tie in well with an pedestrian experience, like Tate's and Paul's, Barbican, Sadler's Wells. And I traced it out and looked at it a little bit, how you move through this, and that these corridors could become fully pedestrian corridors. Picking up the Barbican, the Museum of London, the future concert hall, which will be located. So it's going to be great access. There's a so-called cultural mile also tying in with respect to the Corporation of London. Looking at these roads have been very, very stable and long-lasting. And they have already a lot of activation, but they're unpleasant, they're not beautiful. So these links which we're wishing for will not happen because it's not inviting enough to move through and up there. And I think this goes then further up Goswell Road. We have our own gallery actually accidentally on that spot. And so it continues up through past Sadler's Wells, past the Angel, Upper Street, and again picking up more of the underground stations. Angel and Highbury Islington. Here we could swing again. You swing in a second layer along that little pedestrian side street which exists already with lots of shops. You can pick that up if the trajectory is clear, and then you move up into Upper Street. And Upper Street is, of course, a no-brainer. Hundreds of restaurants, but very fast, far too small sidewalks. and the benefit will be kind of huge. And now, these are snapshots which I made on a Saturday. It's just a wall of buses. So to think that just normal car traffic to be banned isn't enough. The buses are just filling those roads with fumes and with noise. It's an incredible noise, continuously humming noise there, which is terrible. So I want this, and this could go on for miles. And you can have a jog, you can have a marathon, you can walk on a Sunday, or you come in and out of this. You take the train down and walk for a while, and then it goes further. And you can see again there is several lines one could be maintained for all the traffic coming through. I'm not. It's not an ideological battle. It's a pragmatic proposal. But if you look at something like Blackstock Road, it's actually a very narrow street, filled with buses like Upper Street. So it would be the perfect pick for this. And again, instead of the roads would take this, I'm just cutting through highway fields, the parks, and then take over Blackstock Road, leading to Finsbury Park and on and on. So I think it's a viable proposition. You could get a lot of backing for Upper Street, all the residents, all the restaurants and so on, and I think for Blackstock Road equally. And again, you pick up the underground stations, and this is what it is now. It is already a high street. It's relatively narrow, and therefore perfect for pedestrian scale, these kind of high streets. Another topic, finally, to finish off, some of these big cuts, how we can ameliorate them. If you look at Bloomsbury and University of London and then Euston and across, these textures, these fabrics have been kind of sliced apart by these big barriers. And there one could look at what happened in Boston. You don't have to totally cover everything, but one would have to kind of help that and make that a partial inhabitable zone rather than kind of an uninhabitable. And still let, of course, the primary traffic flow through. So, and again, there's the Las Ramblas, which there is traffic and pedestrian. They can coincide in such a large space and make that a more inhabitable zone, and that the city continues. So again, the final vision seems quite out there and kick-ass, if you like, and shocking. But we're just starting with 2 lines, and I think we can bring them in, as I said, weekends first, etc. So I think it becomes a tangible opposition. It just needs somebody to champion it. Not me. I mean, I'm just somebody who's an agent provocateur, somebody more serious in the political domain, and I think this could be happening. And I've put this forward to them as a consultation response to the mayor's draft for transport strategy, with a kind of thesis. And with that, I offer the thesis to you for debate.
Fantastic.
Thank you.